let's get started. We have quite a bit of content to share with you today. So grab your favorite beverage, your favorite daytime beverage, and buckle up for a wild ride through our favorite topics, the ERC, and whatever COVID-19 things we can throw your way. For those of you who attended 2 weeks ago now, I guess, some of these slides will look familiar if you're in Virginia. We went over the newly amended Virginia standard, which it goes into effect on Friday. So I did include that information again, just because of the timing. We'll do those at the end. We're going to hit ERC and federal COVID-19 executive order first. And with me, as always, is Tracy Clark. Hi, Tracy.
Hi, Leslie.
How are you?
I'm doing well. It's been a little crazy in the office. Lots of things going on surrounding COVID.
Well, COVID around money and COVID, right? Not people and COVID. To be clear.
Right. Yeah, I
yes.
should clarify that. Absolutely.
Yes. We're moving
just
money
how
around.
COVID affects the payroll business.
Yes. Yeah, so now that we're in fourth quarter, we've been waiting, and Tracy will go into this a little bit more, but we've been waiting for some updates on the ERC. The rumor has been that they're going to end it early, but that's tied up with the larger infrastructure package, which looks like they're not going to vote on this week. So it's sort of as usual in this pandemic, we're sort of hurrying up and waiting for something to happen in Washington. Mm-hmm. So we'll go over that in a second. But yeah, it's just every day is a new day.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. All right. So quick reminder, we are recording this webinar, and we will post it on our website by the end of the day on the COVID-19 resource page. If you have a question, and we hope you do, or an anecdote, we'd love to hear stories from out in the field. Please use the Q&A function and not the chat so that we can record those for posterity. Or if you don't feel comfortable in this forum, or if you think of something later, you can submit your questions to questions@dominionpayroll.com, and those route directly to either me or Tracy, and we will do our very best to answer your question. Okay, so first we're going to go to the federal, some changes at the federal level around COVID-19 and vaccinations. This is called the Path Out of the Pandemic Plan. And among other things, the main points that affect you all is this emergency temporary standard that OSHA has been directed to develop under President Biden's executive order. We are all eagerly awaiting the publication of this standard. We haven't seen it yet. There's lots of rumors swirling around. They have published a standard for federal workers, and so we've been reading that to sort of glean where OSHA's headspace is on this topic. But what we know now is that all employers, private or otherwise, with 100 or more employees will need to ensure that their workforce is fully vaccinated or require any workers who remain unvaccinated to produce a negative COVID-19 test result on at least a weekly basis before coming to work.
That 100 is aggregate.
That's right.
So
that's right.
It's good to point that out.
Yeah, and we suspect that once the ETS is published, they will address that more clearly, because I've gotten that question a lot. But as of now, so our understanding is that it's 100 employees total. Doesn't matter where they're located. And then also you are to provide paid time off for the time it takes for workers to get vaccinated or to recover if they have any symptoms. And you might know this already, but the tax credits, we were hoping that they might get extended, but they did not. The tax credits for paid time off for COVID reasons expired on September 30th. So if you think you are eligible for some credits for somebody being out for COVID reasons in September, you could still realize those credits retroactively, but anything October 1st going forward, there are no tax credits for that, at least as of now. We think that the ETS will say that employers must pay for the testing. So depending on your workforce, your rate of vaccination, your, what your situation is, this might be pretty costly endeavor for you. So keep that in mind. More on this later, and we're still waiting for, again, definitive guidance on the on who's going to pay for what. Like I mentioned, there was also an executive order that applies to federal workers and contractors. This was more clear. They have until December 8th to get fully vaccinated. Of course, the requirement will comply with all exemptions for individuals with disabilities and for those who refuse the vaccination on religious grounds. Just a quick reminder that, as you all know, folks can request an exemption to the vaccine policy based on a medical disability or a sincerely held religious belief. I've had a lot of questions about the latter, that the disability one is more straightforward because a physician needs to sign off on the disability. If you're looking for a request form template, we have those on our website for both the medical and religious exemption reasons. But the religious one is way more subjective, and a lot of people really don't want to wade into that conversation with employees, which I completely understand. And I think certainly if you have an HR person in-house or an employment attorney on standby, you can evaluate those requests on a case-by-case basis. Most of my clients have been reluctant to actually deny those requests. However, I will remind you that depending on that person's role, if them being unvaccinated poses a risk to your business, a risk to your team, or to your customers, you can deny that request. It's called an undue hardship, and it really just depends on the role of that person and their exposure to other people. So just because someone submits a religious exemption request does not mean that it's 100% guarantee. So I just want to put that out there because it is really tricky. And if you don't have an HR person on staff, we have a service here that can help with that if you need some HR support, and certainly an employment attorney would be able to help. Okay, and then the final thing on this slide is, of course, the new OSHA ETS, or the executive order itself, has been contested by attorneys general from 24 states, wrote a joint letter. At least one state, Arizona, has filed suit. And so, of course, there will be challenges from all different sides. We anticipate, now we don't know for sure, but we anticipate that the challenges may be largely unsuccessful based on precedent in the federal courts in terms of challenges to vaccine mandates. But for now, it is the law. It will be the law of the land as soon as OSHA comes up with the language and the parameters. Anything to add to that, Tracy? Did I miss anything?
No, I'm just waiting with bated breath for this stuff to come out.
So that said, it never hurts to be prepared. So a lot of my clients now are sort of assessing how this will go down in their workplace. So go ahead and create a policy based on the requirements of this ETS, or what we know now. Keep that, if that would probably reside with your HR person if you have one, or a small team of a small task force to sort of see this through. Determine how you will collect vaccine information. I was reading about this morning. Some people are already, well, a lot of people already have been collecting vaccine information for a long time, but now that has ramped up. We've certainly seen an increase in number of requests for our clients to leverage iSolve, which is our platform, to help them track vaccine cards. So determine, if you're not doing that already, determine how you will collect vaccine information, because even though you don't have to collect it right now, I believe you will once this goes into effect.
Mm-hmm.
Tracy and I were talking about that this morning. We don't see a way around it. You'll have to figure out who's vaccinated and who's not. And just as a friendly reminder, you are allowed to ask if someone is vaccinated. There are a lot of people out there who think that's not true. You're allowed to ask if, you just can't ask why. If they volunteer that information, that's fine, keep it confidential, but you cannot you can't be the one to extract it from them. That gets you into the ADA area, and you don't want to be in that area. Tracy brought up a good point this morning about, do we also need to document and track the results of those weekly COVID tests for the unvaccinated, which was a great point, and I didn't have an answer for that. So hopefully that'll be something on the standard when it's published to clarify that. I think obviously, I mean, we both thought, Tracy and I thought that yes, the answer would be yes, because you're going to need to provide proof that these people have negative tests. So, again, start thinking about how you'll do that, how you'll collect that information, what that testing will look like. Number 3 here is to prepare for weekly testing. Try and figure out the rough number of employees that you'll need to test every week. The costs, logistics. Are you going to partner with Patient First? Are you going to do it in-house? Are you going to say, you know what, you're on your own, you just need to produce a test every Monday? What'll work best for your business? I have a couple clients who are actually doing a survey of their workplace in anticipation of this ETS coming out, trying to determine, first of all, letting them know that you all are, they're getting prepared for this and this is what's happening. Secondly, getting a sense of who's vaccinated and who's not. And again, they are allowed to ask that. And then also, if they're partially vaccinated, sort of giving them a sense of the timeline for them to get fully vaccinated. And so you're allowed to ask your employees these questions, and the wording of it should be very careful, though, very gentle. You are complying with an anticipated OSHA standard, and that is something that every business has to do. So with 100 employees or more.
Mm-hmm. And it could be really costly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think, that will play into, different businesses making decisions about whether or not to mandate the vaccine. And then that opens a whole nother can of worms. So, you need to collect all the information that you can about this situation to make that kind of determination.
Yeah, good point. And I read this, we both read this morning that the Biden administration has put in a whopping purchase order for, what was it, Tracy? I feel like it was like $1 billion worth of, of rapid at-home tests.
Yeah.
Now, how those will be distributed, I don't know, but and then also, I believe it said that they're expanding the number of pharmacies that are offering the vaccine, or was it testing?
$1 billion.
Oh, wow. For the at-home tests.
Yeah.
And then did it say, I think it also said that expanding the number of pharmacies that will be offering testing by about 20,000 or something like that, because it has been, since the Delta variant really hit hard around Labor Day, or even before that, it's been harder to get a test. So if you're looking at testing 5 employees every week, that's one thing, and that still is an unanticipated expense. But if you're testing 100 employees every week, that's some real money right there. So pull together a task force and start thinking about these points. And then number 5 here is to outline the process for accommodation requests. So like I said, we have 2 templates on our website for both the disability and the religious exemption request. You can use those. I actually saw some today that were a bit more in depth, that we're in the process of reviewing and vetting to see if we want to post them on our site. But I just got them this morning, and I don't want to put them out there just yet. Just want to make sure they're on the up and up. But for now, you can use the ones on our page, and I would give employees a very clear path to requesting the accommodation. It should go to one person, or maybe your little task force. It should not be shared outside of that. And then evaluate on a case-by-case basis. The medical exemption is pretty straightforward. The form requires a doctor's attestation. The religious one is a bit murkier. I would look at it on a case-by-case basis and evaluate. I mean, of course, if you know this person is not a practicing whatever, and you think that it's a bogus, you're asked to press more. You're allowed to press more. But I wouldn't press too hard unless you have an attorney on board or an HR professional helping you out with that. And then number 6, if you have an attorney, it probably wouldn't hurt to run your policy by him or her, and also your accommodation requests.
There is a question out there, says, will we need to ask contracted services for testing?
Oh, that's a great point. So I actually posed that question to somebody yesterday. And we think, and again, we're waiting guidance, but we think it is the company
Employer.
who employs the contractors. So, but you have to communicate with them. I mean, you need to make sure that they're in compliance. If they're going to be in your building, then like, I don't think, like, you wouldn't be fined if they got called out on it, but you need to let them know that you're a compliant workplace, and you expect them to also be compliant. That's what I would do. But again, we're waiting additional guidance on that. But that's
all right. Then someone said, what if the contracting company has less than 100 employees?
Also a great question. I don't know the answer. What do you think, Tracy?
I think what's going to happen in that case is they're going to kind of get a free pass on having to provide this information. But again, they still have to let you know if someone comes down with COVID. So they're not exempt from that. And that's what your real concern is that, are you exposing your employees to COVID? I guess you have the right, though, if someone's coming into your building, like even if they were a visitor, you would have the right to ask if they've, had any symptoms.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I think
so. I mean, I guess you could ask for them to provide their vaccination status. I don't know. Can you ask that?
I don't know if you can ask that of a contractor. I'm going to add that to my list of questions. Because I only know that an employer can ask, but I don't know about this relationship.
Because what if you if you had people come in that were from like a staffing company, would you then include, I mean, you're not paying them, you're paying the staffing company, you're paying them for service. So that person's not your employee, but they're in your building working. Wouldn't you want to know what their vaccination status was?
I mean, I would for sure. And it makes me think, like, if restaurants can require customers to show proof of vaccination, why can't other workplaces?
Yeah. I would like to see we should look into that and see if we can find some clear clarification on that.
Okay. All right, guys. Jill, thank you very much for that question.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Look into it. All right. Okay, we're going to shift gears to the employee retention credit. Tracy, what's the latest?
Okay. So, the latest is that you can, at this point, you can still take fourth quarter ERC. Here's my little slide. So this is just kind of a background on who covered the ERC. So CARES Act covered wages that were paid between March 13th, 2020 and December 31st, 2020. And pretty much people are pretty clear on whether or not they qualified for that. But if you have some questions on whether or not you qualified, you can certainly reach out to your CPA, or you can reach out to us to find out. But basically you had to be a business that had a mandate that said you had to be shut or partially shut. And then during that time, any wages that you paid your employees would be eligible for the employee retention credit program. And that basically paid up to 50% of those wages, up to $5,000 per employee. That program was set to end on December 31st. And then on December 27th, Trump signed into play the CAA. And basically what he said was two things. One, that he was going to extend it from January 1st to June 30th, the program. He changed it to be still you had to qualify under the mandate of either a partial closure or full closure, but you could do a decline in gross receipts of greater than 20% as compared to the same quarter in 2019. I should have said, I didn't clarify that. For 2020, you could also qualify under a decline in gross receipts of 50% or greater as compared to the same quarter in 2019. So in other words, if you weren't a business that had to shut down, but let's say you were like a janitorial business and you weren't shut down, but all the businesses that you serviced were, and so you experienced a decline in gross receipts of greater than 50%, you could also qualify for the employee retention credit program. So similar, fast forward into 2021, but Trump also said that if you had received a PPP loan in 2020, you could now take advantage of the ERC program, whereas before it was an either or. Now, the newest thing is that there is some pending legislation. The Senate tied the end of the employee retention credit program to the end of third quarter. So I should have said that ARPA, I'm getting all like confused here, but ARPA came into effect in March, and Biden said we're going to extend the ERC program from June until the end of the year. And then the Senate came back and said, you know what, we're going to tie the end of the ERC program to the infrastructure bill. They signed that in, they passed that somewhere around August 7th, I believe. And then they sent it on to the House. So that's all well and good because the end of the third quarter wasn't until 9:30, and that gave the House plenty of time to go over this. Meanwhile, the Delta variant reared its ugly head and has come into our lives with a vengeance. And the House did not vote. So they had a chance to vote on this infrastructure bill on Friday. Last Friday, they didn't do it. They said they were going to vote tomorrow. They're not. Then they said Friday. Looks like they're not. Looks like it's going to be put off until mid to late October before they actually will address it. And they're more worried about other things like healthcare. They're worried about paid FMLA. They're worried about roads and bridges, and nothing has really been brought up about this employee retention tax credit. The issue with that is that by not addressing it, people are taking that credit if they're eligible. They have that decline in 20% or greater in gross receipts. They're taking advantage of that now. And if this gets signed into law, there may be some retroactive recall of those taxes that they took credits for. So we just don't know. So that's kind of where we are right now. So if you are an employer that is taking advantage of the employee retention tax credit, I would reach out to your tax advisor, your CPA, and see what their take is on this, whether or not you should take the live credits now or wait and just take them at the end of the quarter if it's still a viable program at that point. I don't know what I have on the next slides, but
yeah, I was going to say something snarky about the delay, but I won't get into that.
Okay.
We'll just keep going.
Okay. So what employers qualify for ERC? It's a ton of people. So in 2020, you had to be an employer of 100 full-time employees or less. I think I have that on the next slide. Can you go to the next one?
Yeah.
Those are the two factors that I just went over, where you could be a partially or full shutdown. And then also the decline in gross receipts. So you'll have that when you look at these slides later, but that in 2020, it had to be 50% or greater. In 2021, it had to be 20% or greater. And it's not that you have to have both of those factors. You can just have one or the other to qualify. And then I think the next one is about the number of employees. Oh, that's just talking about the aggregate. So you have to, if it's under a single employer, you have to put all your gross receipts together.
And then they would use the 941X to retroactively file.
Yes, they would. And we would do that for them. And then the last one is about the employee threshold. So this gets, it's kind of in the weeds, but it is important to pay attention to your full-time employees. And they compare this to the 2019. Everything goes back to the 2019 numbers. So all the quarters that get compared and the number of employees is all about 2019. So when they say 100 full-time employees, that is employees who worked on average 30 hours per week or more. So if you have part-time people, you don't take two part-time people, put them together and say, okay, that's one full-time employee. And that's like an FTE. And that's what we're used to doing when we're talking about PPP and all of those things. They don't do it that way for ERC. It's all about just counting the people who worked 30 hours or more. So in 2020, you had to have fewer than 100. And then in 2021, they increased that to 500. So that includes a lot of people. So if you're like a gym or a restaurant where you have a small number of full-time employees and a large number of part-time employees, all the wages count towards the ERC, but the employees don't all count, but all their wages do count. So that's that. And that's just going over the amount of credit. So in 2020, you had a max credit of $5,000 per employee for the whole year. In 2021, it's 70% or $7,000 is the max you can get per employee, but it's per quarter. So it's up to 28,000 unless the legislation goes through, then it would be 21,000 for the year, but that's how that works.
Let's get back to vaccinations. We're jumping around today.
Yeah. Okay. So we've already talked about the fact that the OSHA standards are coming down the pipes and they're going to be asking you about your vaccination percentage for your employees and, you know, who needs to be tested and yada, yada, yada. So this is what you should be doing now. You need to be creating a vaccine policy that complies with those anticipated OSHA mandates. I can't stress that enough. And I know Lesley did a great job at talking you through a lot of the caveats that are going into that, but it's going to be really important to have all this documentation somewhere that you can get it easily. So you're going to need that proof that they're fully vaccinated. If they're not, you're going to have proof that they've been doing the weekly testing. So we have a way that you can track that in our system. So I wanted to show that to you. So what we can do is we can build out miscellaneous fields for you. And basically what you can do is you can choose, and this is all customizable and it doesn't cost you a thing to have us put this in for you. You can have the vaccination status, you can put in the vaccination type, you can put in the first dose, the date of that, the second dose, the date of that. If you, the booster is something that you need to know about, we can have that put in. And then a checkbox for the COVID vaccination card being uploaded to our system. That's done under employee documents. So the reason that it's really good to have this done in miscellaneous fields is you can run a report that would then show you the vaccination status and anything else that you need to collect to be able to document for OSHA. We can also put in a miscellaneous field for the testing if you need it. We can have the weekly testing. You can put in the date that the employee had this done. You can have different people have access to this miscellaneous field. So you could have the employee have access to this to be able to put in their vaccination status and all of that. You could have it just for managers and supervisors. You could just have it for a client admin. That's totally up to you who's going to have access to this. If this is something that you're interested in having us do, just reach out to customer service at dominionpayroll.com and that we can set up.
Yeah, this is a really good point, Tracy, and a helpful tool. Thank you for pointing this out. I will say that if you opt for the path of managers uploading vaccine cards on behalf of employees, just make sure that the managers destroy those files. Like, for instance, if I text a photo of my vaccine card to my boss and she uploads it for me, she needs to delete that from her phone after it's uploaded. That's just, that's going to keep you out of trouble for a variety of different reasons, because that's protected, considered protected information. So just wanted to add that. All
Okay.
right.
Yeah, that's
Before-
great. And I see
Yeah.
there's a question in there. What's the wait time for DPS filling our 2021 credits once we request it to be done? Okay. So that depends. If you're asking for current 2021 credits, basically you just call us, you say, hey, I'm ready to apply the credits to my payroll. You have to preview you have to first let us know that you qualify and what your qualifying reason is. And then once you have previewed your payroll, you can call us. We will put the credits in immediately and they will be applied against the very next payroll. And then if there's any excess, which there usually is, it will sit in there until the end of the quarter, and then it'll be transferred onto the 941 and it'll go in like a normal tax credit would with the regular 941s. And usually the refund timing for that is somewhere between 6 and 8 weeks. If we have to do a 941X or an amended 941, it depends on when you call us. So for instance, right now, the quarter has just ended. So our tax department is just working on the regular quarterly, the quarter end tax files. And they won't be finished with that until the very end of October. So they wouldn't start filing the 941Xs until November. So once that's done and it goes to the IRS is backed up to the point where the last I heard it was between 4 and 6 months before people are receiving a check.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Mm-hmm. Well, I did see something that said they have 2.5 million 941Xs to go through.
Oh my goodness.
So they work on the ones that are current, they work on the 941s that are current first, and then they go to the backlog.
Wow. Well, but that could, I mean, I know that's frustrating, but it could in many cases be a decent chunk of change that would come in handy in any quarter, I would imagine.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. So just depending on how big your company is.
So I guess the answer to Ronnie's question is, if it's a regular 941, it'll be within
At
that
the end of the quarter.
At the end of the quarter. But if it's an amended one, we don't really, we don't have a lot of control over the final check issuing.
We don't have that, but the way Ronnie's asking for the wait time for us filing. Our filing, we would start that. If it's a 941X, it's not going to start until November.
Gotcha.
And then they try to get through the backlog within, a month or two. Usually they get it done that month. Depends on how many are coming in. And with it being year end coming up, I'm just not sure.
Yes, everyone be very kind to the tax team as we get into that year end. Okay, so, and again, if you're interested in setting up these fields to track, to use iSolved, if you're one of our clients to help you track vaccination status, please let us know. And also I'll add for we can do this for testing as well. If you want to use iSolved to track negative or positive COVID tests, we can get that set up. We didn't create a slide about it, but we were just talking about it this morning, so I thought I'd mention it. Okay, jumping over to Virginia now. This is a picture of me and Tracy on a mountain. Just kidding. It is not me and Tracy. My arms do not look like that. But you'll recall if you were on our last webinar, or if you've been paying attention in Virginia, that Governor Northam has put forth, well, actually, sorry, they've amended the original standard, which came out last year. They've amended it to be up to date with CDC guidance and the Delta variant. So this is just a clip from the VDH website, which says that you should wear a mask in indoor public settings when community spread is substantial or high. And this is for fully vaccinated people. Now, that community spread portion, we'll go over that in a minute, but there's a metric that the departments of health use to track by county and city. And there's a map on the VDH website that shows in real time if what the locality's level of transmission is. And I'm going to show you that map in a second. But the effective date of this standard, which the details of which I'm going to go over just a second, is Friday. So October 8th is when businesses in Virginia are supposed to comply with this. As far as I know, there is no employee count threshold. It's for all businesses. There are some nuances to that. We'll get into that in just a second. If you are in healthcare or you're considered a higher risk employer, there's an extra training and documentation component that needs to be completed by November 7th. So it's just a pretty tight timeline. It probably, a lot of this is the same in the same guidance that was in this original standard that came out in the summer of 2020. But there are some things that have changed. So hopefully you've already done a lot of this because you were in compliance last year, but we'll go through it nonetheless. So the standard itself, it's sitting here on my desk and it's like 55 pages. I will say that it's not a page turner, but particularly if you're in a higher risk or healthcare setting, you probably want to go through and look at those sections specifically. I'll touch on them today, but I didn't really scratch the surface in terms of those areas. The big thing is that masks are back, even if people are fully vaccinated. If you're in a high risk or area of high community transmission of COVID. So this is in the workplace. Again, I don't think there are any employee count thresholds for this. They've taken away this sort of, the original standard had a low, medium, high, very high risk sort of hierarchy that you were supposed to slot yourself into. And this one has taken that away. It's basically if you live in an area that's considered high community transmission, your employees are supposed to wear masks indoors now as of Friday. The end date is to be determined. So there are some exceptions. If an employee is alone in a room or an office, they can take that mask off. Presumably though, that person has a guest come in, they need to put them back on. While eating and drinking, provided that they are 6 feet away from any other person or divided by a barrier. And when it is important to see an employee's mouth, for instance, if someone's hearing impaired and needs to read lips, or when a medical necessity or religious belief prevents mask wearing. And again, if you have somebody who claims to qualify under this 4th bullet here, I would evaluate that on a case-by-case basis. And would them walking around not wearing a mask, how would that affect the safety of others? Now it does say that for reasons 3 and 4, the employer must ensure that the employee wears a face shield if conditions permit. And I'm not really sure how to interpret that sentence. But then it says, if no face covering at all, employee must remain 6 feet away from others unless the employer can demonstrate if it's not feasible. So, they're sort of punching holes in their own rule here, but I guess what they're doing is giving you an out based on if there's some demonstrable reasons that you can demonstrate for why a person without a face covering is not able to remain 6 feet away from others. And I know that it really depends on what business you're in, so I totally get it if this is not feasible. But essentially, they need to have a medical necessity or religious belief or some sort of disability to keep them from wearing a mask or a face shield. And here's that map that I promised. Evidently, every single county in this Commonwealth is an area of high transmission, which is the bright red, except Fairfax and King and Queen. So if you're in Fairfax or King and Queen counties, you don't have to mask up right now. But if those, like I said, they track this in real time on the VDH website. If it does go back to high transmission, then you put masks back on. So the goal here is to get this map to turn lighter and lighter shades down to no shades at all, where we can all go mask free and resume our lives. But right now, most of the counties and cities in Virginia qualify for this mask threshold. Okay, so I mentioned that the standard has a lot of the same things as before, so I don't know that I need to read this word for word, but I will leave all this on the slide, the deck, so you guys can download it from the website later. But obviously, if someone's suspected or confirmed a COVID-19 positive case, they need to stay out off the work site as soon as possible until they are cleared for return to work. And I'll go over the return to work parameters in just a second. If someone can telework, it's in their suspected or confirmed COVID-19 and they feel okay to work, that's fine. Contractors and temporary employees, this is in Virginia. Again, I know earlier we talked about contractors in this context of the federal executive order, but this is in Virginia. Employers shall discuss with subcontractors and companies that provide contractor temporary employees the importance and requirement to exclude from work employees or other persons who are suspected or confirmed COVID-19. And then message to subcontractors, you shall not allow your suspected or confirmed COVID-19 employees to report to or be allowed to remain at work or on a job site until cleared for return to work. So that's just a general rule of thumb. None of that has changed from last year, and hopefully you all are still complying with this. Okay, so remember back in the summer, in the spring and summer, when quarantining became kind of, way more infrequent than 2020 and early 2021. Well, I admit that once the Delta variant came raging through and all of a sudden people started getting sick again, I had to remind myself what the quarantine rules were. So 10 days now is sort of the measure. 14 is the best, most risk averse measure still. 14 days has always been the preferred window, but 10 days is now something that is acceptable. And remember, people can be asymptomatic. So for those cases, those folks need to try and figure out where their exposure was and then quarantine for at least 10 days from that date. Okay, and then the return to work parameters. And this is regardless of vaccination status. We all know that there are breakthrough cases out there, and just because someone's vaccinated doesn't mean they're not contagious. So keep that in mind. There are also millions and millions of people who are unvaccinated, and those people are children. So even vaccinated people can carry the virus and transmit it to unvaccinated people. So this is regardless of vaccination status. So someone can return to work if at least 10 days have passed since symptoms first appeared, and there is no fever for at least 24 hours without the use of fever-reducing medicine, and other symptoms have improved. A person who tested PCR positive for COVID-19 but never developed symptoms of the illness can return to work 10 days after the date of the positive test. So this is all the same as before. Unfortunately, I think I've probably read these same return to work criteria hundreds of times now on these webinars, but we're still in this. So make sure you communicate to your managers that this is still the rule in Virginia. It's CDC guidance. And if you're not in Virginia and you want to follow CDC guidance, you have every right to do so, even if your state doesn't have an emergency temporary standard like Virginia does. Okay, the notification requirements, if you have positive tests, are same as before. You need to notify employees who may have been exposed within 24 hours of discovery of the employee's possible exposure. And that's 24 calendar hours, not business hours. But you also need to keep confidential the identity of the confirmed COVID-19 person in accordance with the ADA. So that if somebody was not on the same floor, not in the same work site, there's no need to notify them. Keeping it to the need to know people is what you should follow here in terms of a general rule. If somebody volunteers that they're the positive person, or people figure it out on their own, which happens pretty easily in a lot of cases, that's fine, but they just can't find out from you who that person is. If there's anybody else present in at the work sites, you need to notify their employer. So if you had a contractor there, or a UPS guy was hanging out loading boxes, or cleaning crew, then you as the employer need to notify their employer, and that employer will notify their employees. And then the building or facility owner, if this applies to you, you need to notify the facility owner, and that person will require tenants to notify the owner of the, that person will allow the owner to take the necessary steps to clean the common areas of the building. And then they will also notify employer tenants in the building that one or more cases have been discovered, and that the floor or work area where the case was located. And again, keeping that identity of the individual confidential is really important here. Need to know basis only. And the last two notification requirements are still the same as last year, but now they've made the VDH portal a one-stop shop. So if you submit your information about positive cases through the VDH portal, then they will also notify Virginia Department of Labor and Industry. So shop there, now that's new. And you need to notify if you've had 2 or more confirmed cases. If you just have 1, it doesn't seem like you need to notify them, but if you have 2 or more, they'd like to know about it. Okay. Serological test results, known as antibody testing, shall not be used to make decisions about returning employees to work. So I have heard employees make the argument that, well, I've had COVID before, or I've got the antibodies, or both. According to the Virginia standard, that's not enough. They need to take an actual PCR or rapid test in order to be cleared for work and meet the other criteria: symptom-free, fever-free, 10 days, etc. This is also the same as before. If you live with a person who's COVID positive, there can be ongoing exposure. So actually the math gets drawn out a little bit here. Basically, so say your partner gets sick and you need to stay home with them, or you can't quarantine away from them or isolate, which many people can. That person will, write out the 10 to 14 days, and then the last day of that their quarantine period is the first day of yours, because you're still at risk of either coming down with the virus or spreading it. So that's something to think about for both yourselves, but also your employees, and to monitor if somebody does have a family member who's sick, plan accordingly. In Virginia, at least, employers shall not require employees to pay for the cost of COVID-19 testing for return to work determinations. So keep that in mind. If you have a particularly high risk population of folks who may end up having to quarantine this fall for whatever reason, keep in mind that you can't, in order for them to come back to work, you might have to pay for a test for them. Okay, there's a ton on here. I won't read all of this, but cleaning is still a thing. The standard says if it's been less than 24 hours since the person who is sick with COVID has been in the space, you need to clean and disinfect. If more than 24 hours, just cleaning is enough, although you may disinfect if you want to. If more than 3 days have passed since that person has been in the space, you don't have to do anything. So you can sort of align that with your particular setup. And obviously you can do what you want in terms of over cleaning, that's fine too. And then of course, healthcare settings and other types of facilities such as food and agricultural production or processing settings, they have specific industry-specific regulations for cleaning, so those may apply there. Then common spaces shall be cleaned at least once during or at the end of the shift. If there are multiple shifts, then it's no less than every 12 hours. You're supposed to clean shared tools, equipment, workspaces, and vehicles prior to transfer from one employee to another, unless they're fully vaccinated. If they're fully vaccinated, you don't have to worry about that. And then of course, make sure your clean and disinfecting products are EPA list and approved. Hand sanitizing, another thing that I can't believe we're still talking about, but the standard says, and this is exact language from the standard, employees shall have easy, frequent access and permission to use soap and water, which is better than hand sanitizer, or hand sanitizer where feasible for the duration of work. Now, if you're in an office like I am, that's pretty easy because I have a bathroom right down the hall. But if somebody's out in the field or otherwise hopping around, or a salesperson and they're driving around all day, I would give them a bottle of hand sanitizer for their car or the company vehicle, and make sure that they have access to soap and water if they are on site somewhere other than your workplace. We had a really good question about this last time. I think this person runs or works for some sort of trucking or logistics company, and they have drivers who go to offload trucks, and the places where they're offloading the cargo don't necessarily have bathrooms accessible for them. And I didn't have a good answer for that. My hope is that there's a bathroom somewhere with soap and water. But if not, then I would stock their trucks or personal vehicles with hand sanitizer, or whatever it takes for them to feel like they have access to something to clean their hands with. Okay, speaking of being out and about, the standard addresses shared work vehicles specifically by saying unvaccinated employees and vaccinated employees in areas of high transmission. And again, that's geographic areas of high transmission based on your locality, should avoid riding in the same vehicle if possible. If that's unavoidable, then you try and have these employees must wear a mask, they must wear a mask, and the windows should be open. So keep that in mind if you've got people a mix of folks in the car, and obviously physical distancing is probably not feasible in most vehicles, and then they need to wear a mask and crack those windows. Okay, so this is a tricky one too. Break rooms and common areas. The standard says unvaccinated employees should not be permitted in shared spaces and common areas unless the employer can ensure and enforce adequate social distancing in that space. If unvaccinated employees are allowed in the space, relevant signage should be posted directing them to maintain social distancing and mask wearing, wash their hands, and clean any shared surfaces that they use. This one, it feels funny. We don't want to make people feel badly or feel like we're discriminating against them, or otherwise like they have some sort of scarlet letter. I totally get that. On the other hand, this is where we are with this Delta variant. And I think, as wearing my HR hat, I think you should make every effort to message to both vaccinated and unvaccinated employees alike that this is not about weeding people out. This is not political. This is health. And also in Virginia, at least, this is what what they're asking us to do. They're telling us to do, they're not asking us. So to the best of your ability, try to comply with this. Make sure your unvaccinated employees know that they're the same as everybody else. They just don't have as much protection against this deadly virus as vaccinated folks. I mentioned earlier that the standard does have specific sections for healthcare settings and higher risk workplaces, and I really encourage you to read those if that qualifies. But as you might imagine, these are ramped up and really focused on cutting down on pre-screening and cutting down on non-essential people in the healthcare setting. And also, this one's new, actually. The last bullet here is, to the extent feasible, an employer shall ensure that psychological and behavioral support is available to address employee stress at no cost to the employee. So maybe you have an employee assistance program as part of your major medical coverage. You can also get those, buy those ad hoc as separate from your medical coverage if your carrier doesn't provide it. But the standard in Virginia is that you're in the healthcare setting, at least, you as the employer should ensure that there's support available at no cost. Higher risk workplaces include manufacturing, meat and poultry processing, high volume retail and grocery, transit, seafood processing, and all types of correctional facilities. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are the ones that show up in the standard. So certainly if you are in these industries or you think you might qualify, I would definitely check out the section on higher risk workplaces. Okay, so last time in 2020, the standard required most businesses to have a training component. But now it's just or a plan in place and a training component. Now it's just healthcare settings and higher risk employers. And so these folks need to have a written plan, and the ETS lays out what should be included in that plan. Now, there is a caveat here for higher risk workplaces with 11 or more employees. Those are the ones that need to have a plan in place, but you can subtract out any vaccinated people. So if once you subtract out vaccinated people and you're below 11, you don't have to comply with this plan and training requirement. Training requirements apply to these same categories unless the employees at the higher risk workplace are fully vaccinated, like I just said. Fully vaccinated employees can receive written training materials. Unvaccinated employees must receive in-person or virtual training in real time. And then everybody needs to certify that they received training, and records must be kept on file. So there's another thing that you need to keep track of if you fall into these categories. I know I'm going really fast, but I know we're getting close to 12, so I wanted to not keep you guys too long. This is my last slide. Discrimination. This is the same as before and same as always. Just don't. If someone's not vaccinated, or if they are vaccinated, or if they want to wear a mask or don't want to wear a mask, or someone raises a reasonable concern about your infection control measures, whether that's to you directly, other employees, to a government agency, or to the public, you are not allowed to discriminate against them, terminate them, dock their pay, demote them. And if this happens, then again, case by case basis, listen to their concerns, try and meet them halfway, demonstrate outline the things that you are doing, and tighten up if some things need to be tightened up or reiterated, then I would do that due diligence and not discriminate against them in any way if they raise a red flag. I believe that is it. So we do have a question.
Okay. You have one question. But what if they live with someone who has COVID slide? Does the quarantine period apply if the employee who does not have COVID has been vaccinated?
Great question. And it doesn't say, so I'm assuming that it does. Because even if you're vaccinated, you can be a carrier. And so, yes, this is a very conservative, risk-averse approach. And I'm going to go back and look real quick, but the way that I'm looking at this is that it is definitely doesn't matter whether you're vaccinated or not. And I neglected to put the links in the chat today for the ETS and the reporting portal, but I believe we have them on our website now. So if you go to dominionpayroll.com and go to the COVID-19 resource page, we should have not only those exemption request forms that I mentioned earlier, we have some sample policies around vaccination, whether it's voluntary or mandatory, although that all might change soon as when the federal OSHA issues its standard, but then also some links to the emergency temporary standard in Virginia, as well as the Department of Health reporting portal. If you're not in Virginia and you'd like for us to research your particular state or locality, send us a request at questions@dominionpayroll.com and we'll be happy to do that for you. Okay. All right, this is your last chance for live questions, everybody. All right, well, thank you so much, Tracy, for always keeping us informed about tax credits, and also that iSolve piece around recording vaccinations. I think that'll be really helpful to a lot of people.
Yeah.
On my side, if you need some HR support, I'm here to talk about that, and we'll just, we're here to help however we can. So hang in there. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.